Welcome to Truth Behind History. Today we are diving into F.A. Hayek, the thinker behind the headlines and far beyond the road to serfdom. In the next few minutes, you'll see how a young Viennese scholar moved through London, Chicago, and Freiburg, collecting questions rather than followers, questions about how societies learn, how prices whisper information, and how institutions either channel human ingenuity or smother it. By the end of this talk, you'll know not just what Hayek wrote, but why his lifetime journey still matters whenever we try to coordinate millions of plans without a conductor. Picture Vienna at the turn of the 20th century, scientists, artists, economists all arguing in cafes as if coffee could fund enlightenment. Hayek is born in 1899 into that ferment, and as a student he ends up under Friedrich von Wieser, a careful theorist of cost and value. But the gravity in his orbit comes from Ludwig von Mises, whose seminar becomes a kind of intellectual boot camp. Imagine a small table where every assumption gets cross-examined. That room trains Hayek's habit of asking, over and over, how anyone could possibly assemble the scattered knowledge that real people carry in their heads and habits. Fast forward to 1931. Hayek lands in London at the LSE, right into the storm of the Great Depression. Now the questions get practical and urgent. Can policy experts, armed with statistics and good intentions, outperform the messy, decentralized judgments of millions? Hayek becomes a kind of cartographer of the unknown, sketching the limits of what any one mind, or committee, can know in real time. The debates are loud, the stakes are high, and he keeps returning to one theme: coordination under scarcity is not a math problem to solve once, it's a living problem to be managed by institutions that can learn. Then comes 1944. In wartime Britain, with ration books and controls everywhere, Hayek publishes The Road to Serfdom. It isn't a prophecy of doom so much as a caution about how cumulative emergency measures can change the character of a society. He's not shouting, he's tracing a pattern. And people notice. The book turns him from a scholar with sharp questions into a public intellectual with a very public argument. 3 years later, in 1947, he helps found the Morn-Pellerin Society, a forum where economists, historians, and legal scholars try to think long-term about rules, institutions, and the boundaries of state action. Think of it as a workshop on how to design guardrails rather than steering wheels, how to set conditions where good choices multiply without anyone needing to command them. By 1950, Hayek moves to the University of Chicago, not to the economics department but to the Committee on Social Thought, an interdisciplinary perch that fits his temperament. He's blending economics with law, philosophy, and history, building a vocabulary for how orders can grow without being ordered. Later, he settles in Freiburg and Salzburg, places where the conversation about rules and responsibility runs deep. And then the recognition: in 1974, Hayek shares the Nobel Prize with Gunnar Myrdal. The citation focuses on knowledge, prices, and institutions, the very themes his journey had been sharpening since those Viennese seminars. It's a tidy moment, but not a tidy life. The map behind him, Vienna, London, Chicago, Freiburg, looks linear. The questions he chased were anything but. They loop back on themselves: who knows what, when? How do we coordinate without smothering discovery? Where do rules end and discretion begin? Hold those questions. They are the thread that ties this entire story together. For now, remember the path: a young scholar formed by exacting mentors, tested by economic crisis, thrust into a public debate about the character of free societies, and honored for showing that the way we structure our systems, legal, monetary, political, quietly decides what we can learn, build, and become. Let's start with the simplest, hardest question. In a world where everyone knows a little bit about their own corner, how on earth do we line up millions of decisions so that dinner shows up, lights turn on, and paychecks clear? Scarcity forces coordination. Your time is scarce, steel is scarce, even attention is scarce. So the real puzzle is not what should be produced, but how do countless people, each holding only fragments of information, manage to fit their plans together without colliding? There are two broad answers on the table. One says, have a capable center do the heavy lifting. If a committee can collect the data, run the models, and issue instructions, then maybe we get order by design. Another answer says, build a framework of general rules, property, contract, open entry, and let people adjust their plans within that framework, using signals that update as reality changes. No one needs to know everything, they only need to know how to respond to what they see. Now, here is Hayek's wedge: the most important knowledge for coordination isn't the kind that sits neatly in spreadsheets. It is dispersed, tacit, and time-bound. Dispersed means it lives in many places at once, in a shipper's intuition about winter delays, in a shop floor foreman's sense that a machine is running hot, in a teacher's feel for what this year's students are ready to grasp. Tacit means it is hard to write down. You can try to explain why a certain supplier is reliable, but the reasons are often a mix of trust, timing, and context. Time-bound means it expires quickly. The information that mattered this morning may be obsolete by lunch. Ask yourself, if that is the kind of knowledge we rely on, who can possibly collect it all centrally and keep it current? Even with earnest effort, by the time the forms are filled, the phone calls returned, and the dashboards refreshed, the world has moved. The truck that was available is now stuck at a repair shop. The construction site shifted to a substitute material. Consumers walked past one product and entered the shelf of another. The center can be informed, but it is always catching up. So what do institutions have to do? In Hayek's frame, they are not just rules on paper, they are information processors. A good institutional design channels local insights into actions that others can interpret and respond to. When the rules are clear and predictable, people can make plans that fit together like puzzle pieces even if they never speak to each other. When the rules are ad hoc or change midstream, plans collide, confidence shrinks, and people start waiting for permission rather than experimenting and adapting. Consider a small thought experiment. Imagine that every shopkeeper in a city must file a daily report to a central office before changing their opening hours, prices, or suppliers. Could the office ever process those requests fast enough to reflect the afternoon rainstorm that kills foot traffic, or the sudden arrival of a tour bus that empties the pastry case? The shopkeepers already see these changes in real time. Their customers tell them with their feet. Their staff know when the oven is acting up. The central office, however skilled, is a few steps removed from the moments that matter. Notice what this implies. Coordination is not just about setting targets, it is about creating a setting where people closest to the facts can act on them quickly and, when they do, others can read those actions as meaningful signals. That is the heartbeat of Hayek's problem. The more a system relies on distant instruction, the more it risks drowning out the very knowledge it needs. The more a system relies on general rules that let people adjust and respond, the more it can harness what people actually know right now. This is not a moral tale about good people and bad people. It is a practical tale about information under constraint. If knowledge is local, tacit, and perishable, then any approach to coordination must respect that landscape. It must make use of on-the-spot judgment, it must allow rapid correction, and it must avoid bottlenecks where yesterday's plan is still being typed while today's reality is already shifting. So the problem Hayek tackled is the problem any complex society must tackle: how to transform countless private observations into public coherence. Do we try to concentrate knowledge and issue commands, or do we design rules that let each person's small decisions carry information to others? Keep that contrast in mind as we move forward. It is the fork in the road that turns a set of abstract ideas into the everyday experience of abundance or shortage, agility or gridlock. Let's try a simple experiment. Take your hand off the steering wheel of history for a moment and ask, what if some of our most sophisticated achievements are the result of rules and interactions rather than anyone's master plan? That is the essence of spontaneous order. Not chaos. Not drift. An order that emerges because people follow simple, general rules while pursuing their own aims, and the pattern that results is far more intricate than any one mind could have designed. Start with language. No academy sat down and decreed every turn of phrase you use today. Words evolved, pronunciation shifted, new uses caught on because they worked in context. If a phrase clarified meaning, people adopted it; if it muddied meaning, it faded. What looks like a dictionary is really a snapshot of a living process. Order without a central author. Now take common law. For centuries, judges resolved concrete disputes and recorded reasons. Those reasons became precedents, and good precedents tended to survive because they helped people predict outcomes and coordinate behavior. Bad precedents were distinguished, narrowed, or overturned as new facts exposed their limits. The result is a body of law that no single legislator designed, yet it exhibits logic and stability. Again, order that emerges from many interactions under general rules like due process and property, not from a single blueprint. Consider scientific norms. Replication, peer scrutiny, citation trails, these are customs and incentives that grew up to filter claims without a ministry of truth. A researcher who cuts corners risks reputation, a currency that takes years to earn and seconds to lose. Prestige and priority are allocated by communities that judge evidence, not by command. Does it always work? Of course not. But over time, these decentralized checks and balances produce knowledge that survives challenge. And then there are markets. People hear that word and think money, but the deeper idea is discovery. A market is a place where hypotheses about value meet experiments in the real world. If you believe you can deliver a better coffee, faster service, sturdier boots, you make a plan and test it. Customers vote with their feet and their wallets. Suppliers adjust to your orders. Rivals copy what works and avoid what fails. No one intended the full pattern of deliveries, schedules, and product lines, yet the pattern coordinates millions of steps into something as ordinary as breakfast showing up on time. What do these examples have in common? First, simple, general rules. In language, use what communicates. In common law, give reasons, follow precedent, allow challenge. In science, disclose methods, invite replication, show your work. In markets, respect property and contract, allow entry, bear the consequences of your bets. Second, feedback. When something doesn't work, people feel it quickly. A clumsy word never catches on. A vague legal standard gets hammered into shape by hard cases. A weak scientific claim collapses under replication. A bad business model runs out of cash. Third, evolution. These orders are not frozen, they adapt as participants learn. Why does this matter for policy? Because it tempts us to reverse the logic. We see a working order and assume it must have been designed, so we try to improve it by design. Write a grammar rule to fix the language. Draft a comprehensive statute to cover all future cases. Create a single national research plan. Mandate a production schedule for every good. The intention may be tidy, but it often removes the very features that made the order resilient: local experimentation, quick feedback, and the freedom to revise plans when reality pushes back. A helpful way to picture the contrast is to imagine two gardens. In one, a central planner specifies the exact location, height, and timing for every plant, every season. Beautiful on paper, brittle in practice. In the other, the gardener sets broad conditions: soil, water, sunlight, and then prunes, weeds, and rotates crops as conditions change. The second garden doesn't lack intention, it channels intention through rules that let information flow from the ground up. Spontaneous order does not mean anything goes. It depends on rules, and the quality of those rules matters. If the rules reward privilege over performance, you will not get discovery, you will get rent-seeking, where energy is spent protecting favors rather than serving needs. If the rules are unpredictable, people hesitate to try new things because they cannot see how today's risks will be treated tomorrow. Spontaneous orders thrive when rules are clear, general, and predictable enough that people can make long plans and still adjust on the fly. There is also a moral undercurrent here. In an emergent order, individuals are not simply cogs, they are responsible agents whose choices carry information. When you improve a process, keep a promise, or price a product honestly, you are not just serving yourself, you are sending a signal others can trust. Multiply that by millions and you get a society that learns. Replace that with detailed instructions from afar, and you risk silencing the signals that carry this learning. So when we talk about spontaneous order, we are not praising messiness for its own sake. We are recognizing a pattern. Under the right rules, freedom and feedback produce structures of cooperation that no one could have scripted in advance, yet which handle complexity with surprising grace. The challenge for any policymaker is not to draw the final picture, but to set the frame in which better pictures keep emerging. Here is a counterintuitive idea. A price is more than a number on a tag. It is a compressed message about reality that lets strangers coordinate without a meeting. Behind that single figure lives a crowd of local facts. Whether on a shipping route, a broken gasket in a factory, a new recipe in a neighborhood bakery, most of that never appears in a memo. It shows up in the price. Think of a classic example. Somewhere in the world a mine has trouble producing tin. You and I do not know the miners. We have not seen the equipment. We do not even know which country is affected. What we do see, if we are paying attention, is that the price of tin ticks upward. That small change does not tell us the story, but it tells us how to behave. Manufacturers who use tin start looking for substitutes. Consumers who can wait decide to delay a purchase. Entrepreneurs who see an opening try new blends and new suppliers. A single signal sets off a chain of small adjustments that add up to a large, intelligent response. Notice the elegance here. No one needs a master spreadsheet of every warehouse and workshop. Each participant reads one piece of information and acts where they stand. The baker switches to a different tin lining or buys more carefully. The electronics firm tests a design with less metal per unit. The scrap dealer begins to collect and resell more efficiently. The outcome looks coordinated because the signal carries what matters right now. Relative scarcity, not a story. A relationship. Entrepreneurs treat prices like hypotheses. A rising price whispers that something is scarcer or more valuable than before. A falling price whispers the opposite. Acting on those whispers is risky, so people place bets. If their reading of the signal is right, profit says keep going. If their reading is wrong, loss says stop and rethink. Profit and loss are not moral trophies. They are feedback devices that push resources toward plans that fit reality better, and away from plans that do not. Here is a small thought experiment. Imagine a citywide increase in the price of fresh basil after an unexpected cold snap. Restaurants that rely on basil-heavy dishes feel the pressure first. They can raise the menu price a little, shrink portions, promote other dishes, or find a different herb that delivers a similar flavor. Diners react to each change in their own way. Some pay the higher price. Some discover they like the alternative dish. Some go to a different cuisine that week. All of this happens fast because the price concentrates the necessary information into one variable that everyone can read and interpret. Prices also carry time information. A sudden spike often says act now, find a substitute, secure supply. A long gentle decline often says redesign your process, invest in methods that take advantage of lower costs. People who live close to the action recognize these patterns and adapt quickly. That speed is part of the message. It is what allows a city, or an industry, to reallocate effort without waiting for instructions. What happens when the message is blurred? If a price is held below the level that would clear the market, the signal tells buyers to keep taking while it tells producers to hold back or exit. The line at the counter grows. The shelves empty. People begin to search and wait rather than discover and adapt. If a price is held above the level that would clear the market, the signal tells producers to keep making while it tells buyers to stay away. The back room fills with unsold stock. The warehouse gets crowded. In both cases, plans fail to meet in the middle because the coordinating message has been muffled. It is important to add a note of humility. Prices are not perfect. They can be noisy, especially when people are unsure about the future. They can be moved by rumors and fashions in the short run. That is why the discovery process matters so much. Rival firms read the same signals and try different responses. The better readings survive because customers confirm them with repeat business, while the weaker readings are corrected by loss. The system learns, not because anyone has a bird's-eye view, but because the feedback loop is tight enough to reward good guesses and retire bad ones. So when you look at a price, imagine all the local observations that flow into it and all the downstream choices it sets in motion. You are seeing a bridge between countless private facts and a public pattern of order. Not a command. A conversation. One that allows people who will never meet to make plans that fit together. Here is the uncomfortable lesson from a century of argument and experiment. Even very smart planners with very good data keep missing. Why? Because the hardest part of coordinating an economy is not solving a math puzzle once. It is discovering, hour by hour, what people actually want, what producers can really do, and how today's surprises should reshape tomorrow's plans. This was the core of the socialist calculation debate. On one side, the promise that a capable planning board, armed with statistics, could compute the right quantities and prices and then instruct factories accordingly. On the other side, the Mises and Hayek critique, the crucial knowledge isn't sitting in ledgers. It's embedded in habits, skills, local trade-offs, and shifting opportunities that only reveal themselves when people are free to try, compare, and adjust. Think about what markets do without anyone directing them. Rival firms read the same price signals, make different bets, and then face profit or loss. That rivalry matters. It is not just competition for sport, it is the discovery engine that separates good guesses from bad in real time. Now imagine moving that process inside a planning office. You can simulate prices on paper, you can assign targets, you can hold meetings. But where is the real rivalry? Where is the residual clemency that says, if you misread reality, you bear the consequence, and if you read it well, you get the reward? Without that discipline, trial and error becomes trials without clear errors. People check boxes. They report compliance. Learning slows. Once you see that, chronic shortages and surpluses stop being accidents and start looking like system features. Hold the price of bread below the level that would balance supply and demand, and you will get long lines and empty shelves, plus a shadow economy where time, favors, or connections replace money. Push the price too high by decree, and you invite overproduction that sits in warehouses while shoppers walk away. In both cases, the signal that ought to coordinate plans has been replaced by instruction, and the instruction cannot capture all the local trade-offs people are trying to make. There's also the problem of politicized allocation. When a central office must decide who gets scarce inputs, it has to build a rulebook. The rulebook aims at fairness, of course, but it cannot be neutral about every edge case. Should the extra truckload of steel go to the factory with better output numbers, the region with higher unemployment, the manager who argues best, or the sector with political urgency this month? The moment the decision moves from feedback to favor, energy starts flowing into lobbying and posture rather than discovery and service. That is not a moral failure of individuals, it is an incentive shift built into the structure. And then brittleness. A planned system can look very tidy on paper. Every unit has a quota, every route has a schedule, every input has a destination. But when a link snaps, a rail line floods, a part fails, a harvest comes in light, the plan does not know how to reroute itself quickly. It waits for permission. Meanwhile, in a decentralized setting, thousands of small adjustments begin at once. Substitutions, workarounds, retimed shifts, redesigned recipes. The difference is not that one side cares more, it is that one side lets people closest to the facts act on them with immediate feedback. Consider a simple image. You are trying to conduct a flock of starlings with a baton. They swirl and turn because each bird is reading tiny changes in its neighbor's movement and the wind. If you try to write down the instructions for each wing beat from a podium, you are already too late. What looks like chaos from a distance is a very tight, local rule set. Planning keeps missing because it keeps reaching for the baton in systems that only fly when each participant can read and respond to micro-signals that a center cannot sense in time. None of this denies that planners can calculate, or that data can inform. The point is narrower and deeper. When the coordinating signals are replaced by orders, discovery slows, errors linger, and people start optimizing for the plan rather than reality. Shortages and surpluses cluster. Allocation drifts toward politics. Resilience gives way to rigidity. That is why the debate was not just about ideology, it was about the mechanics of learning in complex systems. When people hear growth, they picture speed, faster factories, bigger numbers. But the deeper engine of growth is permission. Permission to plan, to risk, to fail and try again without having the ground rules yanked out from under you. That permission comes from rules. Not a stack of instructions, but a framework of general, predictable rules that let millions of separate plans fit together. Start with the simplest question an investor asks before spending $1. Will the thing I build still be mine tomorrow, and will agreements I sign today be honored next year? Property and contract are not merely legal words, they are time machines. They move purchasing power from the future into the present by making promises credible. If you are confident that a lease will be enforced, you can spend on the bakery build-out today. If you trust that patent claims will be adjudicated impartially, you can pour months into a design that will only pay off later. Rules extend your planning horizon. Without them, everyone hugs the short term. Now, what do we mean by general rules? Think of principles that apply to persons rather than to purposes. No special lane for my project because the minister likes it, and no special tax on your project because the minister does not. Clear property titles, open entry, due process, liability if you harm others, and the quiet bedrock of weights, measures, and accounting standards. These sound dull, but dull is the point. Predictability lowers the cost of cooperating with strangers. It shrinks the risk premium that every deal must carry. The quieter the rule environment, the more music the economy can make. Contrast that with discretion. Discretion says, come to the counter and make your case. Maybe you will get the permit, maybe you will not. Maybe the tariff will be lifted, maybe it will return after the next headline. Maybe the wage rule will be waived for a favored sector, maybe your firm counts as favored and maybe it does not. Each maybe pushes decisions toward lobbying and delay rather than discovery and service. If outcomes hinge on who you know or how the wind is blowing, the smartest hire in town is no longer an engineer, it is a fixer. Notice how quickly incentives flip when we trade rules for discretion. Under general rules, the path to profit runs through pleasing customers and cutting waste. Under discretion, the path to profit often runs through securing a carve-out or blocking a rival. You can measure the shift in office furniture. Do you see prototypes and testing rigs, or do you see marble lobbies and policy briefings? Neither tells a moral story by itself, both tell us where the returns are. Open entry is the most underrated rule of all. It says that if you think you can do better, step onto the field and prove it. This is not cruelty, it is discipline. When entry is open and exit is allowed, the economy can learn. Bad ideas lose resources. Good ideas gain followers. The moment we gate entry with discretionary licenses and case-by-case permissions, we lower the temperature of discovery. Fewer experiments. Fewer surprises. More comfortable incumbents. Less learning. But surely, you might ask, do rules alone deliver justice? What about harms and spillovers? Here the key is liability. Rules that make people bear the foreseeable costs of their actions do two things at once. They protect third parties without prescribing thousands of micro behaviors, and they push firms to internalize risk management creatively. Think of nuisance law shaping factory siting or tort standards shaping product safety. Insurance markets bloom around these rules because they can price risk when the rule of responsibility is stable. There is also the question of adaptability. General rules are not stone tablets, they are commitments to treat like cases alike, plus mechanisms to refine those commitments as new cases reveal gaps. That is why precedent matters. When a court explains its reasons in a dispute, it adds a tile to a mosaic that others can study when they plan. Over time, the picture gets clearer. You do not need a central designer to write the final book of answers, you need a forum where reasons are given, recorded, and tested. That is a growth institution. Taxation fits into this story as well. People can handle almost any reasonable rate if the base is clear and the rule does not whipsaw from quarter to quarter. Volatility in rules is a tax on thought itself. It pushes managers to shorten horizons, to prefer quick paybacks over deep improvements. The measurable cost appears as a higher discount rate and a lower capital stock. The invisible cost is all the projects never proposed because no one could see through the fog. The same logic applies to money. A predictable monetary rule is a contract across time. It tells savers and borrowers what kind of yardstick they will face years from now. When that yardstick wobbles, not by accident but by policy, investment tilts toward the immediate and the easily hedged. We get cleverness about timing instead of craft in production. We will discuss credit conditions later, but hold the intuition here, stable rules reduce the temptation to game the calendar. Let's ground this with a street-level example. You run a small machine shop. Under clear rules, you hire apprentices, invest in better tooling, and sign multi-year supply agreements because you can expect those deals to mean what they say. Under discretionary administration, you keep cash on hand for sudden compliance changes, you avoid specialized equipment that might be stranded, and you hesitate to train workers deeply if a licensing change could shutter you overnight. On a spreadsheet, both shops look similar. Over 5 years, they diverge. One compounds skill, the other idles talent. And what about the charge that rules are cold? That they cannot chase worthy goals with urgency. Remember the gardener. A good gardener does not micromanage every leaf, they set conditions, prune what clearly harms, and then let complex life do what complex life does. Rules channel energy. They do not flatten it. For society, that means we use general principles to secure the basics, life, property, promise-keeping, and we let people discover the specific arrangements that fit their needs, tastes, and technologies. The moral dividend is not small. When people steer their own projects within known boundaries, they carry responsibility for outcomes. Dignity attaches to choice. None of this says that rules are easy to write or costless to maintain. They require institutions that can say no to favorites, that can change slowly when change is needed, and that can explain themselves in reasons rather than slogans. But the payoff is compounding. The longer a community runs on predictable rules, the thicker its web of trust becomes. Contracts get simpler. Financing gets cheaper. The neighborhood expects to be here tomorrow, so it builds for tomorrow. Growth is not a sprint, it is a series of long walks made possible by the pavement underfoot. So, if you want to know whether a society is prepared to grow, do not start with the latest technology showcase. Start with its rules. Are they general? Are they predictable? Do they invite entry and enforce responsibility? If the answer is yes, then people will bring their best local knowledge forward, make bets with confidence, and learn quickly from mistakes. If the answer is no, then even the finest ideas will stall at the permit counter. When you hear the word interest, think translation device. It translates between today and tomorrow. If the interest rate is high, people are saying, I value present goods a lot more than future goods right now. If the rate is low, people are saying, I am willing to wait because there is genuine saving available to fund longer projects. Here is Hayek's worry. What happens when that translator is forced to whisper a rosier message than reality supports? Imagine credit expansion pushing market rates below the level that would have emerged from real saving. Entrepreneurs read that cheap money as a green light to start longer, more roundabout projects. Why not add an extra production stage? Why not build the bigger plant? Why not pour resources into capital goods that will only pay off years from now? On paper, the plans fit. The financing is available. The spreadsheets smile back. But notice what has actually changed. the pool of real saved resources has not magically expanded. The signal changed. The price of time was pushed down. When the price of time is made artificially cheap, the economy shifts toward activities that are especially sensitive to time. Upstream industries boom first. Heavy equipment orders spike. Construction cranes rise. Commodity suppliers ramp capacity. Asset prices swell as more distant cash flows look suddenly affordable. It feels like smart planning. It is often just misread signals. This is the tricky part. It is not simply overinvestment. It is misinvestment across time. Projects are chosen as if tomorrow's resources will match the promise implied by today's interest rate. When the day arrives and credit conditions normalize, those long projects discover their costs were understated and their expected revenues were the product of a brief, flattering lens. Margins turn out to be thinner than assumed. Some lines get mothballed. Others continue at a loss until the write-downs can no longer be postponed. Think of a city that goes on a cheap money building spree. Developers pre-sell units, order steel, hire crews. Suppliers expand to meet the wave. Restaurants near the sites hire extra staff because lunch traffic is great. Then the rate environment turns. Financing rolls over at higher costs. Pre-sales soften. A few towers pause at floor 12. The steel supplier that bought new equipment faces idle capacity. The restaurants nearby watch foot traffic sag. Nothing immoral happened. Plans were made on a signal that said, future resources will be there at this price. The signal later withdrew the promise. Or shrink the lens to a factory. With credit held down, management stretches the production chain, buys specialized machinery with a long payback, and shifts workers into roles that only make sense if throughput grows for years. When the rate rises back toward what savers will actually support, cash flows tighten. The long projects become hard to finish, and the specialized machines are difficult to repurpose. Liquidation is ugly because the capital is specific. The bust looks like destruction. In many cases it is recoordination, painful but necessary, as the structure of production slides back toward what people really saved for. Why call these bad signals? Because they do not just change the level of spending, they change the pattern of spending over time. They lure resources into longer paths that only make sense if society has truly chosen more weighting. If society has not, the correction is not a mysterious thunderbolt. It is the recognition that the plans built on the distorted signal cannot all be completed at a profit. The economy then has to shuffle workers, tools, and materials back toward shorter, nearer to consumer uses. That shuffle is the bust. What about policy? The lesson on this slide is modest and pointed. If you want fewer boom-bust swings born of misread time prices, constrain the temptation to push rates around for short-term goals. Monetary rules that are clear, predictable, and insulated from day-to-day pressure reduce the incentive to manufacture optimism with cheap credit. Let the interest rate do its real job, reflect the balance between how much people want now and how much they are willing to wait for later. The quieter the hand on that dial, the fewer grand projects will be built on sand. So, cheap credit is not simply fuel. It is also a message. When that message tells a prettier story than the underlying savings can support, the economy reorganizes itself in ways that feel like progress while the tide is rising and feel like disarray when it falls. Hayek's point is not to scold. It is to remind us that signals about time guide the shape of production itself. Distort them, and you do not just get more activity, you get the wrong activity. The road to serfdom is often misread as a siren screaming inevitability. Hayek is doing something quieter and more precise. He is drawing a map of a road. Not a slippery slope that drags you whether you walk or not, but a sequence of steps that become easier to take once you begin. The warning is cumulative. Each emergency measure, each targeted control, each exception that requires a permit rather than a principle, makes the next exception more thinkable and more necessary to hold the last one in place. Start in wartime Britain, the setting in which the book appears in 1944. Rationing, price controls, direction of labor, licensing of imports and building materials, all understandable under existential threat. The point is not to second-guess those choices. The point is what happens afterward. Controls that solved yesterday's bottleneck create today's constituencies. Ministries build rulebooks and offices to administer them. Firms reorganize to win allocations rather than customers. Citizens adapt their habits to coupons and queues. And when peace returns, the system does not simply snap back. Bread, for example, is rationed after the war rather than during it. Meat and some other goods remain controlled into the early 1950s. A temporary logic acquires a peacetime life. Why does that happen? Because controls are not only technical tools, they are political instruments. If steel or foreign exchange or housing permits are allocated by discretion, then the skill that pays is not only efficiency in production but fluency in the process. Once that incentive exists, energy flows into lobbying and compliance theatre. Targets get met on paper while shortages and waiting lists migrate off paper. You do not need villains to get this pattern. You need only a system that replaces signals with permissions. There is also the enforcement problem. A plan is not a suggestion, it is a set of required outcomes. If the required outcomes conflict with what local conditions allow, the plan must either adjust quickly or compel obedience. Adjusting requires humility and fast learning. Compelling requires authority. Over time, the path of least resistance is often to expand powers so that policy can be made effective. That phrase does heavy lifting. To make a price ceiling effective, you need penalties for selling above it. To make a labor directive effective, you need penalties for refusing the assignment. To make a production quota effective, you need inspections and sanctions. None of this announces itself as a grand ideological turn. It arrives as a series of technical fixes to keep yesterday's fix from unraveling. Hayek is careful on another point that is often missed. He distinguishes planning for competition from planning against competition. General rules that secure property, contract, open entry, liability for harm, those can be called planning if you like, but they are rule-making, not command. They set the game so that discovery can proceed. The danger zone begins when planning substitutes detailed instructions for rivalrous adjustment. The more decisions are centralized, the more knowledge must be centralized, and the less room there is for people close to the facts to correct the center's mistakes in real time. Does this mean tyranny is around the corner? No. The book says the opposite. It argues that the risk is a drift, not a fate. Emergencies normalize discretion. Discretion rewards political alignment over performance. The habit of exception becomes a culture of administration. And cultures have momentum. Each small step feels practical. Each expansion of authority can be justified by some bottleneck or abuse the last expansion created. Meanwhile, the range of choices open to ordinary people narrows quietly. Not by a single decree, but by the accretion of permissions one must apply for before acting. Think of it as path dependence in institutions. The first detour is voluntary and narrow. The 10th detour is how we do things here. Reversing course now threatens jobs inside agencies, investments made under the old rules, and reputations built on running the machinery. Officials are not blind to problems. They are trapped by yesterday's solutions. So are firms that learn to thrive by gaming paperwork instead of serving demand. That is the road. Not a slide. A series of steps that become costly to undo the longer you walk them. There is a moral thread running through this, but it is not scolding. It is about the dignity that comes from steering one's own plans within general rules, and what is lost when discretion takes the wheel. When you need permission to try, you try less. When you must wait for a quota to be raised to meet demand, you learn less. When outcomes depend on favor rather than feedback, trust erodes between strangers. These are not abstractions. They are the texture of daily life under a regime of well-meant, cumulative controls. So the title is a metaphor with instructions built in. Roads have exits. Roads have signs. Roads can be repaved. The caution is not to fear every public action, but to treat discretionary controls as expensive precisely because they are sticky. If you must use them, write the off-ramps into the on-ramp. If you claim they are temporary, put dates and triggers in ink. If you centralize decisions, be clear about how those powers will shrink when conditions change. Otherwise, the temporary becomes normal, and the normal becomes hard to question, not because anyone planned it that way, but because no one planned how to stop. If you think markets are about who charges the lowest price, you are missing the real action. Competition is not just a race, it is a research program. Rival firms are running parallel experiments on the same problem, and customers are the peer reviewers. That is why Hayek calls competition a discovery procedure. It finds things no one could have predicted in advance, new combinations, better processes, surprising preferences. Picture a street with 3 bakeries. Same flour, same ovens, same morning rush. Now let them try different hypotheses. One experiments with overnight fermentation to deepen flavor. Another invents a pre-order pickup line to reduce waiting. The third swaps to a local miller whose grain behaves differently in humidity. None of these ideas is guaranteed. That is the point. Each is a bet on a different reading of local conditions. By noon, the feedback arrives. The pre-order line cleared the bottleneck. The new flour works but only after a technique tweak. The overnight fermentation produces a bestseller on weekends but not weekdays. The winners are not chosen by committee, they are chosen by repeat customers, margins, and the simple reality of cash left in the till. Notice how many problems get solved at once. Preferences are measured without a survey. Costs are revealed without an audit. Feasible techniques are distinguished from clever stories by whether they keep paying for themselves. The signals that matter are quiet but relentless, a full tip jar, an empty tray, a supplier who actually delivers on time. Each firm sees these signals for itself and adjusts without asking permission. Multiply that by a city, then by an economy, and you get an enormous search process that no planner could choreograph because the choreography is being written as the dance unfolds. Profit and loss in this setting are not medals. They are messages. Profit says, your hypothesis about what people want and how to provide it was closer to reality than your rival's hypotheses. Do more of that. Loss says, your story was compelling on paper, but your execution or your reading of the world was off. Change course. The beauty here is that the message arrives fast and does not require a hearing. You do not have to persuade an official that your idea should continue. You have to persuade people who can leave if they are unconvinced. What makes the discovery so powerful is open entry. If someone believes all 3 bakeries are missing something obvious, the door is not locked. A 4th shop can try a gluten-friendly sourdough, or a late-night window that serves the bar crowd, or a subscription for households that want a week's loaves delivered on Sundays. Entry is a test of conviction. Exit is a test of humility. Together, they are how a community learns quickly without sacrificing the future to a single guess. There is also a diffusion effect that textbooks rarely capture. When one firm stumbles onto a better method, competitors copy it. Purists complain about free riding. But think about what copying really means here. It means the benefit of the discovery is not trapped in one silo. The neighborhood gets better food, faster service, safer tools, smarter logistics. The pioneer still gains first-mover advantages and reputation, but the baseline rises for everyone. In science, this is called replication. In commerce, it is called survival. Consider a very different example, a small manufacturer deciding whether to adopt a new quality control protocol. The protocol costs money, slows the line at first, and requires staff training. Without competition, the temptation is to postpone. Under competition, rivals who implement the protocol early begin to ship fewer defects, cut warranty costs, and win repeat contracts. Their profits do not just reward thrift, they quantify that the protocol works in this context. Others adopt because the evidence is visible in outcomes. The industry becomes a little wiser, not because someone issued an improvement decree, but because open rivalry made the better practice hard to ignore. Now ask a sharp question. What happens to discovery when rivalry is muted? If entry requires a string of discretionary approvals, if prices are cushioned from feedback, if contracts can be bent for friends but enforced on strangers, the experiments do not stop, but their results get blurred. A loss might reflect a bad idea, or it might reflect a permit delay. A profit might reflect a sharp insight, or it might reflect a quiet exemption. The learning slows because the messages stop being about reality and start being about relationships. Again, no villains required. Change the environment, and you change what the signals mean. Failure deserves a moment of respect here. In a discovery process, failure is not waste, it is tuition. A city that never allows a restaurant to close is a city that never learns which menus, price points, and service models actually work for its residents. The moral weight of this is simple and human. When people are allowed to try and bear the consequences, good and bad, they become authors of their own lessons. Responsibility scales. The social safety net can and should catch people when they fall, but it should not turn the ground into a trampoline that removes all information about what went wrong. There is also time in this story. Discovery under competition is continuous, not seasonal. Plans are revised daily because today's signal may differ from last week's. A sudden surge in demand for oat milk forces a cafe to reorder, reprice, and rethink inventory space. A quiet Tuesday teaches a retailer that staff scheduling needs a tweak. No one needs to write a 5-year plan to accommodate these truths. They are handled by 1,000 small moves that add up to something large and adaptive. So when we say competition discovers, we mean that it reveals facts no one could have written down in advance and allocates resources toward the plans most consistent with those facts. It invites many small bets instead of a few large ones. It lets better readings of the world crowd out worse readings without drama. And it turns customers into active participants in governance, not by filling out forms, but by choosing and returning. If you want a one-line summary for the slide, here it is. Competition is a learning machine wired to reality. Turn the dial down, and learning slows. Turn the dial up within fair rules, and a society becomes better at matching effort to need, method to material, hope to fact. Here is Hayek's late-life heresy, stated calmly. What if money did not have a legal monopoly? What if currency were an industry, where issuers competed to keep your purchasing power steady, and you could walk away from a sloppy issuer the same way you switch from a bad phone plan? Not chaos. A market test. Picture 3 private issuers in the same city. Each prints a distinct unit, clearly branded, impossible to confuse, and each publishes a simple promise: we will keep this currency stable against a transparent basket of everyday goods. Not a mystical standard. A rule you can audit. If the basket costs more in our notes this month than last, we will contract our supply or raise the redemption rate until the purchasing power gets back on target. If it costs less, we will expand. Reputation becomes the anchor, redemption the lever. Now imagine you are a shopkeeper. You can accept any of the 3 notes, post prices in the unit most of your customers prefer, and convert at visible rates that update as conditions change. If issuer A gets sloppy and lets purchasing power drift, you and your customers quietly migrate to issuer B or C. No speeches. No petitions. Exit punishes error faster than warnings do. That is the disciplining mechanism Hayek wants. Issuers live or die by how closely they track the target that ordinary people can verify at the checkout line. Why would an issuer behave? Because the business model depends on trust. If their notes reliably buy the same basket month after month, payroll departments will hold them, wholesalers will price in them, and households will save in them. If the notes wobble, market share evaporates. In this setting, profit is a certificate that you kept your promise about stability, loss is the fine for drifting off target. The issuer's incentive is to run a tight shop, publish data, invite audits, and adjust supply using rule-governed operations in its own liabilities, because the alternative is irrelevance. But what keeps the system from splintering into confusion? Start with the most underestimated point in monetary life: coordination already happens around a common unit of account. Even if different media circulate, people like quoting prices in a unit that others understand instantly. Hayek's bet is not that 10 units will dominate forever, it is that competition will select a small number of reliable standards, and that merchants will gravitate toward quoting and settling in the most stable one. Think of it less as a free-for-all and more as an open contest to be the yardstick everyone actually prefers to use. There are serious objections, and they deserve airtime. First, network effects. Money is the ultimate everyone uses it because everyone uses it technology. Once a unit of account is entrenched, new entrants face inertia even if they are better. That is real. Early on, checkout counters would need simple conversion, accounting systems would need to handle multiple ledgers, and people would learn to compare prices across units without a headache. The coordination cost is not imaginary. Second, liquidity backstops. A central monopoly often claims 2 advantages: uniform payment plumbing and a lender of last resort. In a competitive regime, who catches a solvent issuer facing a temporary rush to redeem? Hayek's answer is to make the issuer's promise narrow and testable, stability of purchasing power, and to let that promise be financed by conservative portfolios, explicit capital buffers, and standing lines with counterparties who care about the issuer's reputation. Skeptics counter that, in a panic, fragmentation could worsen stress. The reply is that discipline is sharper before the panic precisely because there is no expectation of a universal rescue. You can hear the unease. That is the debate. Third, transition risk. Prices, wages, and contracts would need clear denomination rules. A shop might tag in 2 units during a changeover period. Employers might state salaries in 1 unit while allowing optional settlement in another at posted rates. Courts would need simple guidance for contracts that straddle units. None of this is insoluble, but it is work. Hayek's claim is modest: give people legal room to experiment, and the better designs, clearer rules, easier accounting, steadier purchasing power will win users. If not, they will vanish without a national overhaul. Notice the pattern in these objections. They are about coordination costs, not about the human capacity to keep promises. Hayek is not promising a utopia, he is asking for a test. Let issuers try rules that keep the yardstick steady. Let customers decide which yardstick they actually trust. Remove the legal barriers that lock in one issuer regardless of performance, and make exit the quiet referee. If the incumbent does better, the incumbent keeps the field. If a challenger truly offers a more credible stability rule, it earns users 1 ticket at a time. If you want a street-level feel for the mechanism, shrink the story to a farmer's market. One vendor posts prices in the city standard unit and accepts all notes at the day's conversion. Another vendor posts in a rival unit known for holding its value season to season. Customers compare, not because they enjoy math, but because they care whether their grocery budget stretches the same this month as last. Over time, the unit that spares them unpleasant surprises becomes the unit they request in change, the unit they ask for in invoices, the unit they keep in a household buffer. The yardstick that protects planning wins because it keeps plans from wobbling. There is a moral undercurrent here that stays within the facts. When people can leave money they do not trust, the issuer must earn trust continuously. When people cannot leave, discipline rests on promises from the inside. Hayek's proposal simply shifts the burden of proof. Instead of asking citizens to accept yardstick changes for policy reasons, it asks issuers to keep the yardstick steady for human reasons, so that long-term plans, wages, and contracts do not float on a moving raft. A final caution. Competition in money is not a license to be clever with jargon or to bury risk in fine print. It is a license to be clear. A stable purchasing power target, a visible rule for how you keep it, capitalization that can absorb shocks, and redemption terms that ordinary users can understand without a dictionary. Fail at that, and the market will deliver the verdict quickly. Succeed, and you gain the most precious asset in monetary life, confidence earned by performance rather than conferred by statute. That is the slide's point. Money without monopoly is not a promise that fragmentation will save us. It is an invitation to let reliability be chosen, not declared, and to let poor stewards exit the stage without drama. If multiple issuers can keep the yardstick steady, people will find their way to the ones that do. If only one can, competition will reveal that too, by everyone quietly choosing the standard that keeps their plans intact. Let's put the ideas on the table next to the historical record, carefully, without cherry-picking. 3 contrasts, 3 different cultures, and one question running through all of them. Do general rules that allow discovery tend to unwind shortages and raise living standards faster than detailed permissions that try to steer outcomes case by case? First, post-war Britain and West Germany. Britain emerges from the war with heroism and exhaustion, and with a machinery of controls built for emergency. Ration books, price ceilings, licenses for building materials, foreign exchange controls. Some of that makes sense while the rubble is still warm. But the habits of administration linger. Bread, famously, is rationed only after the war, and meat and other staples remain rationed into the early 1950s. Queues and coupons become part of peacetime life. The goal is fairness, the side effect is waiting and workarounds. Cross the channel to the western zones of Germany in 1948. A brutal winter behind them, a currency reform and a quiet revolution ahead. New money appears, old money is retired, and most price controls are swept away in one weekend. The story is not magic, it is incentives. Goods that had been hiding in black markets begin to reappear in shops because selling legally at real prices finally makes sense. Industrial production lifts from its floor. The black market shrinks because the legal market can breathe. The rules do not make anyone virtuous, they make it worthwhile to bring goods out of the shadows and invest in making more. The lesson is not that one nation cared more than the other. It is that signals and permissions shaped how quickly normal coordination could resume when scarcity was still real. Second, India before and after 1991. For decades, the License Raj organizes industry through permits and quotas. Entry is negotiated rather than earned. Protection from foreign competition is high. Managers learn to be fluent in applications and renewals. That world produces pockets of excellence, but the average pace is slow and cautious. Then, a balance of payments crisis forces a rethink. Licenses are abolished across swaths of industry, tariffs are cut, the currency is adjusted, and foreign investment rules are clarified. Suddenly, the path to profit points more directly through serving customers and cutting waste than through navigating approvals. Growth rates lift over the next decade. Exports diversify. Firms that once planned around annual permissions now plan around rivals and buyers. Again, the moral is not that one set of leaders is better people. It is that a system of general rules and open entry changes what counts as skill and where talent flows. Third, China beginning in 1978. The blueprint does not begin with a grand privatization decree. It begins with permission to try. Farmers in some villages sign household responsibility contracts that let them keep output beyond a quota. Township and village enterprises are allowed to operate with surprising latitude. Special economic zones become laboratories where prices, trade, and foreign capital can interact under clearer rules. There is still a plan, and the state is still large, but crucial margins are open to decentralized discovery. Output rises. Trade explodes. Hundreds of millions leave poverty as people closest to the facts adjust to prices that carry information rather than orders. When a local experiment works, it scales. When it fails, another county tries a different approach. The center watches, sometimes late, often cautiously, but it does not have to write every instruction in advance because the rules in these zones let feedback do the heavy lifting. You can read these cases in many ways. Here is the thread this slide wants you to see. Where rationing, quotas, and permissions try to hold patterns in place, knowledge has trouble surfacing. Black markets bloom because people still need to coordinate, so they do it in the shadows with time and connections instead of money. Where rules shift toward clear property, open entry, and prices that can move, the shadows empty out. Discovery speeds up because messages about scarcity and opportunity reach the people who can act on them, and those people do not have to file for permission before making common sense adjustments. Does this mean every control is folly? No. Emergencies exist. Transitional bottlenecks are real. The caution is about stickiness. Britain's emergency tools proved hard to unwind. India's permitting culture proved expert at reproducing itself until the crisis forced a break. China's experiments worked in part because they were allowed to be experiments, observed and iterated rather than declared final. In each place, the long-run differences came less from intentions and more from how systems processed information and disciplined power. There is also a human scale to these contrasts that data tables can miss. In West Germany after the reform, shop shelves filling was not an ideology, it was a signal that legal trade had become worth the risk again. In India after 1991, managers who once waited on signatures spent more time studying customers and processes. In China's early reforms, farmers who could finally respond to prices planted, harvested, and invested with near-term confidence rather than guessing what tomorrow's directive might require. These shifts sound small. They compound. So, 3 cases, 1 pattern. When rules let prices convey local realities and let people enter the field to test their hunches, shortages tend to turn into schedules, and schedules into growth. When detailed permissions substitute for those signals, ingenuity does not vanish, it goes underground. The lesson is not triumphal. It is practical. If you want learning and resilience, build systems that reward adjustment at the edge where facts arrive, then let those adjustments be read by others quickly and clearly. Let's be fair and precise. Hayek's ideas invite strong objections, and some hit real targets. So on this slide we will sit with the best critiques and give the best replies, without slogans. Start with information economics. Critics say markets with asymmetric information are not automatically efficient. Sellers may know more about quality than buyers. Borrowers may know more about risk than lenders. Hidden actions and hidden types can push outcomes away from the social best. If that is right, isn't Hayek's praise of decentralized coordination overstated? Here is the reply that fits Hayek's frame. He does not claim that markets, as they stand, are perfect. He claims that they are discovery devices that get better when rules sharpen feedback and lower the cost of learning. Translation: if fraud is cheap, make fraud costly with liability and disclosure. If quality is hard to observe, standardize measurements and invite certification that can be sued if careless. If borrowers can hide risk, insist on capital cushions that absorb loss and on contracts that align incentives. Notice the method. The fix is institutional and general, not a standing committee that rewrites thousands of specific transactions. The aim is not to declare markets flawless, but to design rules that intensify the very process that reveals flaws and corrects them. Next critique. Market power. A dominant firm can throttle entry, shape prices, and dull discovery. If competition is a learning machine, monopoly jams the signal. What then? Hayek's emphasis on rules points to a narrow, potent answer. Guard the channels of rivalry, property that is secure, contracts enforced, open entry that is genuinely open, and clear, knowable prohibitions against collusion and exclusionary privilege. The bias is toward preventing artificial barriers rather than managing results case by case. Again, the theme is discipline by structure, not discretion by office. Third critique. Externalities. When actions spill costs or benefits onto bystanders, price signals understate true trade-offs. Does the knowledge story help here? It does, but only if the rule shifts the cost to the party best placed to manage it. Give the harmed party a clear claim when practicable. Price the use of scarce commons like spectrum or road space when measurement is feasible. Require basic safety and liability where harm is diffuse and proof is hard. The pattern repeats. Use general, predictable rules that push actors to internalize foreseeable costs, then let decentralized adaptation do the detail work. Do not pretend measurement is free. Do not pretend that discretion has no politics. Now the macro critique. Hayek's business cycle theory, you say, rests on a story about misread interest rates and distorted relative prices along the production chain. But the empirical record is messy. Many booms and busts do not line up cleanly with any single credit aggregate. Measurement of investment lengthening is hard. Identification is contested. What should we do with that? The fair reply is modest. Treat the theory as a mechanism, not a monocausal history of every downturn. Ask narrower questions. During episodes of unusually cheap credit, do we see investment tilt toward longer payoff projects? Do relative prices in upstream capital goods swing more than in downstream consumption goods? Does the adjustment afterward involve reallocation back toward nearer to consumer production? If the answer is often yes, the mechanism earns a seat at the table. If the answer is mixed, the theory marks a risk channel to watch, not a universal law to worship. Mechanisms are for diagnosis and prudence, not for grand declarations. Another line of attack focuses on spontaneous order. Isn't it romantic to praise evolved orders when some evolved orders preserve injustice? Customs can encode exclusion. Traditions can entrench power. Hayek's own writing concedes a hard truth. Orders that emerge are not automatically good. That is why he stresses general principles like equal application of law, open entry, due process, and protections for basic liberties. The point is not that evolution sanctifies everything it produces. The point is that changing complex orders is safest when you change the rules of interaction and responsibility, not when you substitute a single blueprint for millions of plans. Reform by rules, clear, general, perspective, aims to unwind injustice without destroying the information and cooperation those orders already contain. There is a humane concession often missed. Hayek allows room for a flaw under misfortune provided it is delivered by general means that do not commandeer the discovery process. Think social assistance or insurance designed as a rule, not as a lever to steer prices, quotas, or favors. The logic is consistent. Help the person while keeping the signals that coordinate everyone's plans honest. A safety net can be a rule. Central direction is a command. They are not the same instrument. One more critique worth hearing. If knowledge is so local and tacit, why trust regulators at all to write good rules? Isn't that the same knowledge problem in a new costume? It is. Which is why the rule design Hayek favors is simple, general, and testable by courts that publish reasons. The more a policy requires constant micro-judgment by offices insulated from exit and rivalry, the more it inherits the knowledge problem it sought to solve. The remedy is not paralysis. It is humility. Prefer few rules that bite hard over many permissions that blur accountability. Make changes prospectively, not retroactively. When rules fail, change them in public with reasons, so future actors can plan on the new footing. You might hear a final objection from a different direction. Isn't this just the nirvana fallacy in reverse, comparing messy institutions to an idealized market? The honest answer is to compare like with like. Take live, imperfect market arrangements and ask what changes in rules would sharpen discovery and discipline power. Take live, imperfect regulatory schemes and ask what changes in rules would reduce discretion and politicized allocation. Keep your eye on incentives, on feedback speed, and on the cost of being wrong. Nobody gets utopia. We do get systems that learn faster or slower. That is the spirit of fair replies. Not denial, not triumph. An insistence that the deepest problem in social coordination is epistemic. Who knows what, when, and with what incentives to act on it? If you accept that framing, you will judge institutions by how well they surface knowledge, how quickly they correct error, and how clearly they keep power within rules that everyone can read. The critique sharpens the theory. The theory, trimmed of bragging, becomes a guide for design. Here is the quiet punchline to everything we have discussed. The problem of knowledge is not only technical, it is moral. When a society decides how to coordinate, it is also deciding what kind of responsibility people are allowed to carry, and what kind of dignity they are allowed to keep. Start with the simplest observation. Each of us sees a sliver of the world that no one else sees quite the same way. A nurse notices which supply runs short every Thursday. A mechanic hears a sound that means a belt will fail in 2 weeks. A shopkeeper learns that customers switch brands when rain hits by 4 in the afternoon. This is not trivia. It is the living texture of reality. If institutions give people room to act on those observations, they are treating citizens as authors of solutions. If institutions require permission before acting, the same citizens become petitioners. That difference is not cosmetic. It is a shift from responsibility to deference. Ask a plain question. When plans collide, who should adjust? In a rule-governed system, The answer is whoever is closest to the facts with skin in the game, because signals like prices, queue lengths, and delivery times tell them quickly when they are wrong. In a permission-governed system, the answer is whoever holds the file. The file can be orderly. The file can even be kind. But the file cannot hear a failing bearing or see a Thursday shelf emptying in time. The file's virtue cannot replace the worker's eyesight. This is why concentration of decision power carries a moral cost even before any abuse appears. Concentration means fewer plans are allowed to be tried. Fewer plans tried means fewer chances to learn. Fewer chances to learn means smaller lives, not because people lack ambition, but because the space for agency has been narrowed. We often talk about freedom as an abstract right. On the ground, freedom is the permission to put your local knowledge to work without waiting for a signature. It is the difference between apologizing for acting and apologizing for failing to act. Consider what happens to trust under different systems. In a world of general rules, trust grows from repeated dealings where promises are kept and breaches have consequences. A contractor finishes the job well, you recommend them. A supplier misses a deadline, you renegotiate or switch. Trust becomes a network of earned reputations. Now consider a world where discretion dominates. Trust flows upward, toward offices that can grant or deny. Relationships become political capital. People who would have competed on performance now compete on access. You may still get good outcomes, but you learn a different lesson about how good outcomes are achieved. There is also the matter of error. Human beings make mistakes everywhere, in markets and ministries alike. The moral issue is not whether errors exist. It is how fast they are revealed and who bears the cost. Under discovery by rivalry, loss tells the experimenter to stop, revise, or exit. Under command, a mistake can become a mandate that survives because careers and narratives are attached to it. The longer a bad policy lasts, the more people are trained to treat obedience as prudence. That is not a condemnation of officials. It is a reminder that concentrated power makes it harder to say we were wrong without shaking the building. Think about fairness in this light. We often equate fairness with equal slices of a pie at a moment in time. But there is another kind of fairness that plays out across time, fairness in the right to try. When entry is open, when rules are public, when measurement is honest, people with little status can still build reputations that cashiers, landlords, and lenders will respect. The process is patient and sometimes unforgiving, but it does not ask for credentials that begin in someone else's office. If access replaces effort as the path to success, you tell the next generation to invest in flattery over craft. That is a moral loss disguised as pragmatism. Let's make this concrete. After a storm, a neighborhood needs food, fuel, roofing, and work crews. Under clear rules and flexible prices, trucks roll in, prices bounce, then settle as more supply arrives, and neighbors can choose between waiting, paying, or helping each other bridge the gap. The system is not painless, but signals and agency are alive. Under tight, discretionary controls, movement waits for approvals, price signals are frozen to be kind, and shortages last longer. People now coordinate with time and connections rather than with money and plans, which is a polite way of saying the most connected are served first. The intention was compassion. The experience is triage by favor. Which outcome better respects the dignity of strangers trying to solve a shared problem together? There is a deeper ethical current here, one that Hayek hints at without sermonizing. When rules are general and known in advance, they do not promise perfect outcomes. They promise that you can understand the field and adjust as you learn. That promise treats adults like adults. It asks them to choose, to bear consequences, and to earn trust. Systems that lean on permission invert that posture. They promise to protect you by narrowing what you are allowed to try. They lower visible risk today and raise invisible risk tomorrow by slowing adaptation. The protection feels humane, and sometimes it is, but it often protects the system more than the person. Notice how humility works in these two worlds. In a discovery system, humility shows up as exit. If your idea is worse than you hoped, you stop. In a command system, humility must show up as repeal. Someone with authority must admit that the rule they championed is now causing harm, which is easier to obtain on a tight deadline after a surprise. The exit of a plan no longer paying for itself, or the repeal of a rule whose guardians face blame if it goes away. The answer tells you why resilience belongs to the many-plan world. None of this implies that institutions should be indifferent to hardship. A community can decide to guarantee a floor under misfortune while still letting signals work. It can help people directly rather than commandeering the instruments that carry information for everyone. That choice preserves the dignity of the person helped and the learning signals that help the next person avoid the same harm. It is the moral equivalent of stitching a safety net under a high wire rather than telling all acrobats to perform on the ground. So the stakes of knowledge are not only about efficiency, they are about whether we honor the person who notices, acts, and learns. They are about whether cooperation among strangers rests on performance or proximity to power. They are about whether society treats errors as tuition or as threats to authority. When we choose systems that let local knowledge breathe, we are not indulging ideology. We are respecting the basic human fact that wisdom is distributed, that responsibility dignifies, and that learning requires room. Stand back from the details and a simple shape appears. Progress does not come from a single mind getting everything right, it comes from systems that let many minds learn quickly, correct openly, and compound what works. That is Hayek's enduring edge. He asks us to judge institutions by how well they surface knowledge, discipline power, and protect the space where ordinary people can try plans without waiting for permission. Here is a compact checklist you can carry into any policy debate. First, property and contract that are clear and enforceable, so long plans have a home. Second, open entry and easy exit, so better ideas can appear and weaker ones can leave. Third, liability for foreseeable harm, so costs are faced where they can be managed. Fourth, predictable taxation and administration, so decisions are driven by customers and craft rather than by favors and fear. Fifth, a stable monetary yardstick, so time is priced honestly and investment horizons can lengthen. Sixth, general rules and transparent reasons in the courts, so like cases are treated alike and learning can be anchored in precedent. Finally, when emergency powers are used, write the off-ramps into the on-ramp, so temporary tools do not turn into a way of life. None of this claims omniscience. In fact, it is the opposite. Hayek's Nobel lecture called the pretense of knowledge the deepest policy temptation, the urge to act as if we can command complexity from the center simply because our spreadsheets are bigger. The practical antidote is humility in design. Prefer institutions that encourage countless small experiments over institutions that commit everyone to a few large bets. Prefer feedback that arrives from customers and rivals over reports that arrive from offices insulated from exit. Prefer rules that set the game fairly over permissions that award the next move. To close, keep 3 questions nearby whenever you encounter a reform that sounds tidy on paper. Where are price and profit signals being muted, and what information will be lost if they are? Which specific rules invite discovery, and which discretionary levers invite lobbying? How will we measure learning, not just output, so we can tell whether the system adapts without drama when facts change? If those questions guide the conversation, you do not need to trust anyone's savior. You can trust a framework that lets ordinary judgment do extraordinary work, one day at a time. Thanks for watching. If you found this kind of careful, story-driven analysis valuable, please like the video, drop a comment with what surprised you most, and subscribe for more episodes. If thoughtful and entertaining history is your thing, there is plenty more waiting for you here on Truth Behind History.